Hi, students at Sioux North. This is Mally again. Thanks for joining in, and we're connecting again to Corrine at the Royal Botanical Gardens in Burlington. Last time we talked about invasive species and what that means and what their impact is on the community, but now we're going to take it even bigger and talk about the human impact on the community, including your community in Sioux Lookout, Ontario. So I'm going to turn it over to Corrine, and we'll see you guys in just a little bit.
Thank you, Mally, and welcome everybody back. And yes, we're going to take a look at what are things that have impacted ecosystems, and one of those will be invasive species, which we have already we've sort of been introduced to. So let me get started, and I'm going to get started right away with this. So what I'd like to do today is we're going to take a look at what a wetland is. We're going to take a quick look at the different types of wetlands and the functions of a wetland. Why are wetlands so important? We're going to also look at the biodiversity of a wetland, and then wrap it up with looking at what some of the human impacts are, but also what are we doing about it at RBG, but also is there something that you can do to help with this? So what is a wetland? And if you look at this picture, you'll see that this is a very typical wetland. And in a wetland, you have plants that are adapted to living in areas where the soil is very wet. These plants would not do very well up here where the trees are in the forest, just like these forest trees would not do very well here in the marsh. These plants are also, this is part of an ecosystem, but it's also a transitional zone between the terrestrial or the very drier areas and these very wet areas. So it's sort of in between. If we look at it, we know it's an ecosystem. As I said, it's a transition zone. There's lots of water, and that water can be there sometimes permanently, or sometimes even for as little as 7 days, as might happen, especially in areas of a forest where you might be and where we are, where you have snow melt that sits in small pockets within that forest. And that water is actually really important for certain animals. And then the vegetation, the plants that live in this soil, in this hydric soil, and hydric meaning it's very waterlogged. So these plants are specifically adapted to living in these conditions. So there are several types of wetlands. The first one you see here is a marsh, and you have lots of marshes where you are. You also have swamps where you are. A marsh is a place where you see lots of green plants like this. So these happen to be cattails. We've also got wild rice here. There are water lilies, and there are plants under the water. So a marsh, green plants, and at least 3 levels of plants. Another type of wetland is a swamp, and you have swamps where you are. And the type of swamp depends on the types of trees that are in that swamp. And that's what makes a swamp different from a marsh, is there are trees within that area. And these trees are all adapted to living in this wetter environment. So this happens to be a maple swamp. You might have a black spruce swamp. You might have, if you were further south, much further south, you might have a mangrove swamp or a cypress swamp. Another type of wetland, and this is a very important one, especially a little further north. We have them here, though. This actually is one that is very close to Montreal. It's called Alfred Bog. And this is, as I said, a bog. And bogs are different from marshes or swamps. Marshes and swamps, their water comes from the groundwater. Their water comes from rivers leading into those marshes, and it comes from precipitation. A bog, however, the water is only from precipitation or snowmelt. there is no water coming up from the ground. And so because there's no water coming up from the ground, there are no nutrients coming up from the ground. So those plants have to have different ways to get some of the nutrients that they need. And that's why in a bog, you have carnivorous plants, but you also have, because there isn't that water that's easily coming up through the ground, you also have the basis of that bog is sphagnum moss. It's a very absorbent moss. If you think about moss, and if you get a chance when the snow melts and when it gets a little bit warmer, get some moss and just squeeze it and see if there's any water that comes out. There probably will be. So sphagnum moss is very absorbent, and so it's going to provide the water. And then that's why you often see, there's my finger, touching some sundews. These are carnivorous plants. They will fold over and capture those insects, but there's the sphagnum moss all around there. And then another plant that we have here is a pitcher plant, and it will capture the insects down inside there. So, and there's some, you can see the pitcher plants right there. So wetlands are very important. They provide, so just imagine, you see this little thing up here. This is a dragonfly nymph, or a baby dragonfly. And this is a bladderwort. And it's actually another type of carnivorous plant. But these wetlands, these plants and these wetlands, they are the ones that keep this ecosystem going. If there are no plants, this ecosystem would not function. These plants provide oxygen, they provide food, they provide shelter to all sorts of animals. But these plants are also critical for filtering the water, for mixing the water, but also for protecting the area against erosion and flooding. So as the water is coming down from our spring rains and our snow melt, as that water is coming down, if it has a wetland to go into, that wetland acts like a sponge, and it's able to hold that water in both heavy precipitation times and in low precipitation times. So where you are in Sioux, look, you've got some amazing wetlands all around you here. Some great rivers and lakes, and on the edges of those there are some wetlands. But here's something that, and it's called the Ramsar Convention on Wetlands. They're the ones that really monitor the international wetlands, a lot of support. What they say here: wetlands provide us with water, they provide food and livelihoods for millions of people. They support rich biodiversity, and they store more carbon than any other ecosystem. Yet, the value of wetlands remains largely unrecognized by policy and decision makers. So today, what I'm hoping is that you will get a better understanding of how important a wetland is. And maybe because of that, you might be one of those decision makers that help support the wetland. So wetland functions, we know about the flooding, we know about that. That's a really important in prevention of flooding. But it's also, now take a look at these pictures. And I'm going to sort of go through a series of pictures, and I'm going to see if you can figure out what these pictures represent. So we've got a dragonfly nymph, or a baby dragonfly, and we've got a mosquito larva. Look at those great big predator eyes. This mosquito larva is good food for this dragonfly nymph, as is the adult mosquito good food for the adult dragonfly. But they also might be food for a frog or even a turtle. And this is our Midland painted turtle, the one that we have here, but it could also be food for a Western painted turtle where you are. Those little baby turtles, though, or even tadpoles, might be food for this pike, or possibly for a lake sturgeon. And even though it's called a lake sturgeon, it actually prefers to live in fast-flowing waters like rivers or deep, deep lakes. And so you have them there, and it's a very important fish. It's actually an endangered species. So there's a lot of, with the dams that are being built in certain areas, and the habitat that's being destroyed or fragmented or split apart, these fish that don't start reproducing until they're well in their 20 years, and even later for females. So they have to live a long time before they can actually start reproducing. But there are lots of things that impact these fish. And then again, those fish might also be a tasty treat for a mammal of some sort, whether it's a mink like this, or whether it is another type of mammal like a bear or a wolf. And then again, it also might be a treat for a bird. So this bird is enjoying this fish right here. I think this is, and this is a cormorant. But regardless, those animals, what I was showing you, that was a food chain, or possibly even a food web, because in a wetland, you've got so many different species depending on each other. It is much more like a web than just a simple chain. Another function of a wetland, it's known as nature's nursery. So even though you see all these plants here, and you might go, well, it's just plants, but all of those plants are there, and they are ways for those smaller animals, those young that don't have any parental care. That's where they're going to hide. They're going to hide in these cattails and these reeds. This is also where they're going to find their food. It's the same thing with these geese. These goslings are going to be protected, and that goose is going to take them into sheltered spaces when it's time to give them some care. Another thing that these wetlands do, now you may recognize these tundra swans, but these tundra swans, now this picture was taken in a local field close to where I live, but this was a migration time. They were actually migrating north, and they may very well have gone right past you. So in their journey north to get up to northern Nunavut and Northwest Territories, where they nest, this is where they breed. In order for them to make that journey from the States all the way up here, they have to stop occasionally, they have to feed, they have to rest. This wetland is a rest stop. Just like if you were traveling a great distance, you would need to stop as well. They need to stop. But some birds, like this little red knot, not only travel within North America, but this little bird every year travels all the way from its nesting grounds here in Nunavut in the tundra, all the way down, past you again, all the way down, keep on going, all the way down to the tip of South America. That's where they overwinter. And then in the spring, they'll start making their way back up again. They have a very important stop here at Delaware, where they have to eat the eggs of the horseshoe crab, giving them that extra boost of energy to make it all the way back up here to the tundra to nest again. So animals don't have borders. They don't know that they're going to another country. All they know is they need to find a place to rest, to feed, to nest. So this might be a perfect situation. And I know you've seen my next picture, because we're going to be talking about some of the human impacts. And this picture you've seen before, with all these lights representing all of the communities, even Sioux Lookout, possibly right there, or Dryden right up in that area too. So these represent all these communities. Imagine that little red knot flying at night, which they do. A lot of migrating birds fly at night. And look, if they want to find a place to stop, imagine them trying to find a place to stop when it's full of these communities like it is. So it's very, very difficult. So the first thing, one of the impacts, and I'm going to ask you to write these down so that you can remember them, because we're going to use these words in a little bit. The first one is population. People, absolutely. Now, because those people, they need things, and one of the things they need is food. And so food from a wetland was a very important source for a lot of people from all over the world. And one of the foods that they ate was wild rice, and is wild rice. We still eat, we still harvest it. So wild rice is a very important wetland crop, as is regular rice grown in paddies. You may recognize cranberries, but not only food, but also medicine. There are all sorts of plants within a wetland that provide medicine. And it has been recognized that the roots, and used by indigenous peoples locally, that these roots are actually important for helping with muscle strain and improving the health of people. So, and this is just one of the many plants. So there were lots of people that had come to this area where Royal Botanical Gardens is for thousands and thousands of years. The indigenous peoples came here, they gathered, they hunted, and then they went to their winter grounds. But as we all know, so did the Europeans come. And when the Europeans came, they started settling. And what happened was that they had never seen so much wildlife. People who had come from Europe had come from very dire straits. It was very hard. They were having a very hard life. So they came here and saw all this open land. They saw all these fish and wildlife that they'd never seen before, literally like food just falling into their laps. And so what they did is they told two friends, and they told two friends, and they told two friends, and I think you can see where this is going. A lot of Europeans came, and they were all looking for food. They were all looking for a place to live. And so where this used to be 100% wetland, they put roads and they divided the wetlands. They built their houses on the shores of the wetland. They cleared trees to plant their fields close to the wetlands. And because of the housing and the roads and the fields, it caused a lot of habitat loss. So the habitat that would have been there for all those plants and animals was what we call fragmented or split apart, as is the case with what happens in this road, or it was completely lost, as is the case with what happens when a building is put up or a field is created. Some places, and this is a picture from Manitoba, some places actually go so far as to not just go through the wetland, they actually completely drain the wetland. That is a serious, serious problem when you drain the wetland, because what you can't see is there are fish and frogs and all sorts of small little animals being removed at the same time as that water is. And here's another little fact about Manitoba that I found. I couldn't find it for Ontario, but I did find it for Manitoba. There are wetland losses of 3.6 hectares a day, and that's equal to 4.5 football fields, Canadian football fields, because this is from CBC News. So imagine that type of wetland loss. We have lost nearly, in this part of Ontario where I am, we've lost over 85% of our wetlands. That's a lot of wetlands to lose. But there are communities that are putting wetlands back into part of the landscape. They realize the importance that wetlands play in the ecosystem. So this is a positive thing. So some places are removing them, some places are putting them back. Where we are here at Royal Botanical Gardens, and that's right in this area, and there's Lake Ontario right there. Where you see this black area here, this used to be wetlands, and this used to be the little bay that was here. What this is now is Hamilton Harbor. All this black, so see, they filled in all these little rivers that were feeding into Hamilton Harbor and then Lake Ontario. So they filled in all those little rivers, cleaned it all up. There's Hamilton there, but this is the harbor. And so one of the problems is when you've got a harbor and you've got a big industrial area, something has to be done with that waste. And what does it do? It goes into the water and it sinks to the bottom. And so that water and that substrate or the ground under the water becomes very polluted. And that is one of the other human impacts. So now we've got 3 so far: population, habitat loss, pollution. Well, there were lots of Europeans that came. Lots of people came to this area. It was a very productive area. And all along the edge of this little area here, you can see, and I'll just click there, were little fishing huts. And there's a little fishing boat right there. This was a very busy little place. And people would fish and fish and fish and fish and fish and fish and fish. And I think you know where I'm going with this. They fished so much. They took so much from the wetland. It's called over-harvested. It wasn't sustainable. And what happened was they took so much that this wetland couldn't survive. There wasn't the wildlife there anymore. And so people said, well, wait a minute, what are we going to eat? And they said, no problem. I know what we'll do. And so what they did is they introduced the carp to the wetland. But the carp is, as you know, it's a bottom feeder. It roils around and uproots the plants. You uproot the plants, you kill the wetland. So just take a look, and you've seen these pictures before, but just to remind you what happens. So the carp were able to come in, they were coming in and they were traveling down the Desjardins Canal. They were able to infiltrate or go through this wetland very easily. So here are the plants. Not too bad, but look what happens over time. Less and less plants until eventually there are no visible plants. There may be a few underwater, there may be a few along the shore, but there really isn't the population of plants that there should be to support the animal life that depends on it in a wetland. And it was because, as I said, the carp. And we know that the carp, we know the female produces 2 million eggs from an earlier program we did on invasive species. We also know that they outcompete for everything. They don't have the predators. They're a perfect example of an invasive species. So let's take a look at those 5 things that we know are human impacts. And they are population, pollution, habitat loss, over-harvested. So the populations of the native fish were over-harvested. And finally, invasive species. You'll see that all these words have red capital letters. Can you think of a word that would use these 5 letters? And that might help you remember what the human impacts are. Let's see if you've got it. If you guessed hippo, you are absolutely right. So habitat loss, invasive species, population, pollution, over-harvesting, those are the things that impact an ecosystem, including climate change, because that's something we also discussed when we had our discussion, when we talked about invasive species, how climate change is allowing or providing an environment that is now getting more suitable for invasive species that may not have been able to go that far north. So there are things that we're doing about where we are right now. Okay, there are things that can be done. And one of the things is we have this thing called the fishway, and it spans the Desjardins Canal. It spans this area completely so that fish cannot go into the marsh unless they come through here. And underneath here, there are 5 cages. In the spring, they're open on this side so that the fish get caught in them, and then in the fall, they're open the other side as the fish are migrating out of Coutts Paradise. The cages are brought up one by one, and then they are brought over to this holding tank where the fish are released into the holding tank. There's flow of water all the time, and our staff have to count the fish. They have to identify the fish, and they sometimes do it with a little ticket, a little counter here, but you'll also see the gate. And this little gate can be opened or closed one way or the other. So right now, it's allowing the fish to go to the marsh. These are all native fish. If, however, there was a fish that was non-native, the gate would be closed the other way, and out that fish would go to Hamilton Harbor. And that is what we'll see in a couple of minutes. So with the native fish, they take measurements, they weigh them, and for some of them, they may even implant little telemetry markers so that this gives them an idea of where some of these fish might go. So here are the fish in the holding tank, and I'm going to switch over and I'm going to play a video for you. Okay, so let me just make it a little bit bigger. There. I'm hoping you can see this video. So I'm going to play the video. And what you should see, look through this window, because that is where the carp are coming down. These are carp. But I'm going to stop it in just a second because there's one fish that I want you to see. And it's that one. Oh, that one right there. So this one right here, the one that was looking white. This is not 100% carp. What this fish is a goldfish carp cross. And this is where somebody had dumped their goldfish into our marsh, and goldfish and marsh are so closely related that they are able to reproduce. And the offspring can reproduce. So it's bad news for us. And they feed just like carp do. So they uproot the plants just like the carp do. And then here, this is the one I really want you to see. There, my nice big guy. And we even are missing part of his tail. But this is almost 1.5 meters, almost 4 feet. This is almost 0.5 meter, 18 inches. It's a big, big thing. So let me see if I can, I'll have to close this and it will stop my sharing. There, so yeah, let me get back here so you can continue to see what we're doing. So we're having those fish are being excluded from the marsh. That's the first thing, because the fish are bottom feeders and they fed in Hamilton Harbor where the industries have dumped their waste. Those fish are considered toxic. So we can't kill them. We can't burn them. We can't bury them. We just have to let nature take its course. But we can exclude them. We can keep them out of the marsh, which is a really good thing. But the other thing we can do, so we can keep them out with the fishway, but we can also keep them out by creating these berms or hills that divide the creek from the marsh. And as you can see, these are made from Christmas trees. We get about 20,000 Christmas trees every single year. People drop off their Christmas trees and we line them up on these berms. So here they are, just like that. And this divides the marsh from the creek. And this is what it looks like in aerial view. So all this here, that's a berm made out of a Christmas tree. All of this here is a berm made out of a Christmas tree. This is the marsh. It's protected. This is the creek. And there will be carp in this creek too. But this color is also the color because this is spring. And this is the color of the water as it's being sort of brought down through the hills and stuff like that. So this is just erosion. So there's a lot of this red soil where we are. And there's a little bit of a closer look because you can see the green of new plants. We haven't planted them. These are just naturally there. So they've just come there. So it's a good thing. We also do a lot of transplanting of aquatic plants into the marsh. And sometimes we even have to put a fence around these plants. You can see maybe just at the back there, you can see the little fence. And we're planting cattails here, right up to their armpits in really muggy, sometimes pretty stinky water. But that fence there protects these plants from deer, from geese, and from carp. So it gives they have a good chance of making it. So all that work that we do is there to help and support and maintain the ecosystem or one of those ecosystems that supports over 50 endangered species that we have to look after. Now, the other thing I want to show you is something that you can do where you are, and let's just, here it is. Okay, this is something you can do. So I don't know if you've heard of it, but iNaturalist is something that is always looking for information about what natural things are around the world. And you can help scientists learn what's in your area. If you've got a phone that's got an app like this, iNaturalist, you can take pictures when you go outside, and then when you come home, you can put your observations into iNaturalist. So here's an example. There are over 35 million observations on this website. There are over 271,000 species of plants and animals. There are over 122 identifiers, people that say, yes, this is what this person saw. And I am one of these. I am an observer. There are over 900,000 observers, and we are all contributing to this. And I just happened, let's see now, am I here? No. So I wanted to, have I got myself signed in? I don't have myself signed in. Oh yes, your observation. So these are my observations. So, and I'm just gonna go a little bit. So you can see that I've found things, I've made observations down here, I've made observations down here, and I've made observations right here. And those observations are going to help scientists find things. One of my observations that I happened to come across was so unique. It was actually a very rare animal, a very rare butterfly. And I'm just trying to see if I can find it. No. Ah, there it is. It's called the American snout, and it's a type of butterfly. And there it is. So it's a little, but what's really cool about it is it has a long little snout, and you can see right there. So all I did was I took a picture of it and made sure I knew where I took that picture. And then when that was done, when I got back inside where I had my Wi-Fi or I had good connection, then I entered my data. So this is something you can do and to share, to let people know what plants and animals are where you are, because people need to have that information. When I went online, I looked up northern leopard frog, and there are northern leopard frogs in your area. So I think I've got it right about here. So there are northern leopard frogs in your area, just a little bit further south, but maybe there are northern leopard frogs where you are. It's just no one's told the scientists that they're there. So that, in a nutshell, is human impacts, how we humans have impacted natural areas, in particular wetlands. And where you are, there are lots of wetlands, there are lots of forests, and there are lots of things that people are doing, whether it's mining, whether it's boating, whether it is forestry, but there are things that people are doing that are impacting local areas. But perhaps you can help those scientists learn more about the plants and animals in your area that need protecting. So on behalf of me, Carney, at Royal Botanical Gardens, thanks very much for joining me.
And thanks, Corrine, for another amazing session on the plants and animals that are around us, and how humans are definitely impacting the environment, and things that we can do. And I really love that action item about going to iNaturalist and taking pictures and recording, because I'm sure that the information, if the students are able to get it into that website, would be extremely valuable data. So that could be something that the students can do. So I'm just going to turn off the recording.